Thank you very much for bringing me on your show again. It's always a great pleasure.
Let me start with what has happened yesterday. We had the two sides firing at each other, the United States and Iran. And it started, it seems, by American attack on Iranian boats. What has happened yesterday, Professor?
It was actually the night before, the day before yesterday at night. The Americans bombed uh, two naval vessels, small naval vessels. I think two were on each, and they murdered four soldiers or guards. And it was unprovoked, and they were in Iranian territorial water, and there's no excuse. They were implying, I think, that they had something to do with mines, but they were not even in a place which had uh, anything to do with any which would have any need for mines. It was Iranian territorial water. So it's very strange, and we're seeing very different messages from the United States. The Iranians responded; they fired missiles, and also I think there was a ship struck hours ago alongside the coast of Oman, outside of the Persian Gulf, possibly a response to the U.S. aggression. But the point is that we are getting mixed messages from the United States. On the one hand, we saw all those messages. First, we had flexibility from the Americans, and the deal, in my opinion, is a good deal for Iran. And then there was a lot of pushback in the United States, and then Trump began to make all these crazy tweets that if he was serious, that would mean that the deal was completely undermined. But from my understanding, at the negotiating table, his tweets had nothing to do, or his social media posts had nothing to do with what was going on at the negotiating table. But the last, I don't know, 5% or the last bits are frozen, from my understanding. They've been frozen for a few days now. Then we had this assault, and it's unclear why the United States is trying to. First of all, they murdered four people. Four families have lost their young sons, and it's unclear why they're doing this, that why they did this. And then we had, of course, the Israeli regime again saying that they're going to carpet bomb Beirut and bring down all the apartment blocks. And you would think there would be, of course, outrage in the West, but the West has really exposed itself. There's human rights and all that, the nonsense, that the facade that we would hear about for decades, or that we would see for decades, it's all gone. But Netanyahu wants to expand the war in Lebanon, to carry out airstrikes on civilian targets at a much greater, uh, much more extensively, in order to wreck the ceasefire. Because, and it should remind us all of what happened during the first ceasefire, after the fighting, and when right before the Islamabad talks, there was an agreement so that ships that were linked to those countries that were helping the United States against Iran, the Saudis, the Emiratis, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE, they would be able to leave. But one of the conditions was a regional ceasefire, including Lebanon. And so, as soon as that ceasefire agreement was declared, Netanyahu began carpet bombing cities in Beirut. He killed hundreds of people in 10 minutes. I mean, it's amazing what, just talking about these things, and how the West just lets it happen, and Western journalists are quiet. It's just unbelievable how the narrative in the West what it used to be like, and what it is now when it comes to the Israeli regime. But in any case, he wrecked the ceasefire back then. If he had halted the fighting, then we wouldn't be in this global economic crisis that we're in today, because the shipping through the Strait of Hormuz would have increased back then. That's like a month and a half ago, more than a month and a half ago. So right now, it seems like he wants to do the same thing. And then the Iranians responded, saying that if he does this, then the peace process, the negotiations will be disrupted or stopped altogether. So this is where we are right now. And then on the other hand, Trump put out a social media post. I'm sure you want to get to that, where he talks about the Iranian nuclear program, and he says instead of saying that the enriched uranium has to go to the United States, he's talking about alternatives. Now, Iran is not negotiating this with the United States yet. It has left this for the after the first stage. If the first stage passes off successfully, if the 60 days uh, um, confidence building measures are implemented, then there will be negotiations, which will be about Iran, the sanctions against Iran, which are very extensive, and many of them are law in the United States because Congress and the Senate have approved of them, and of course the nuclear program. So, but that will be left for later. But now we have the challenge of the U.S. provoking Iranians by killing Iranian sailors, and the Israeli regime slaughtering innocent civilians in order to wreck the ceasefire. So it's really unclear what will happen. Uh, no one knows. Everyone is just saying we have to wait and see. You can't even say um, like there's this will probably happen or that will probably happen. It's too cloudy. It's too cloudy. You can't see through the fog.
Yeah. Iranian response, as we've learned from IRGC, they shot down a MQ-9 drone, and the other drone was they fired at another drone, RQ-4 and F-35. It seems that F-35 is in the region. Are they testing Iranian air defense system to see the location of the air defense system, or to see what's going on close to the close to the Strait of Hormuz? What is the capabilities of Iranian army, Iranian IRGC, when it comes to the air defense and the improvement of the air defense system of Iran?
Well, obviously that is a part of it, but they actually did kill 4 people. 4 people were martyrs, so it goes even further than that. They haven't done any extensive damage beyond that. I mean, when they said they fired missiles at launchers and that sort of thing, that's none of that was really serious. What happened basically was that the Iranians fired missiles at them after they murdered those 4 sailors, and then they fired missiles back. And then today, the um, the a ship was hit off the coast of Oman. I don't know exactly what was on that ship, but I think it was a commercial ship. But I think that was probably had something to do with the UAE. I'm guessing. But in any case,
It was an
tensions are
oil tanker, Professor Marandi.
for which
Yeah,
country?
this
Then it
one,
must
off the
UAE
coast
then.
of Oman.
Yes, but probably near UAE because Oman and the UAE,
Yeah,
they're
they're
right
so
beside
close.
each
Yeah.
other. Yeah, so Iran wouldn't do. Iran has never struck anything that belongs to Oman. During the war, they remained untouched. There were a couple of drones that hit Oman, and it was clear that it was from the Emirates or Saudi Arabia because Iran has very good relations with Oman. Actually, the Oman has benefited enormously by staying out of this war, and they have excellent relations with Iran, and they have had no damage. And that's the path that the others could have chosen, and they chose to do the opposite and assist the Americans. But in any case, the point is that when you look at what the Americans did in the Persian Gulf, and when you look at what Netanyahu is planning to do in Lebanon, and what he has been doing, and then when you look at Trump's social media posts that I explained earlier, it's very difficult to see where things are going to go. The Speaker of Parliament went to Qatar to make sure that, as a part of this agreement, that the transfer, I think about $12 billion to Iran from Qatar takes place, uh, actually happens, because we've had the last time Qatar, our money, if you recall, I'm sure you recall, it was when it was stuck uh, in Korea, South Korea. Then they transferred it to Qatar, and then they wouldn't transfer it to Iran. The Americans were dishonest. The Biden government, they were dishonest, and they wouldn't let that money through, even though there was an agreement. They used uh, uh, they used shortcomings in their agreement, loopholes to prevent Iran from using it. So this time round, the Iranian delegation is in Qatar to make sure There's no loophole, and as soon as there's an agreement, if there is an agreement, that money is swiftly transferred to Iran.
Just before talking about, I want to focus on what has happened in Qatar, but here we've learned that Oman is improving the relationship, in terms of the trade with Iran. And a new decree, an executive decree ordering Oman to increase its volume of trade and economic relations with Iran, which was signed by the Sultan of Oman. And I think the new mechanism of the Strait of Hormuz is bringing these two countries together as well. And Iran said is not going to be a toll. Yesterday, we've learned from the foreign minister of Iran is there would be no toll system, but is a fee system,
Yeah.
something like environmental fee, something of that sort.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's no toll, but there'll be a fee. Now, you can. In any case, they're going to take. They're going to benefit from each ship passing through, and they will. But more, perhaps just as important, is the fact that they will be able to control who goes through, because they don't want American naval ships to go through. They don't want American ships to go through that carry equipment for naval bases or Israeli regime equipment or anything like that. So the Iranians are going to remain in charge of the Strait of Hormuz, and they are cooperating with Oman, and the Omani government is fine with it. And as you rightly point out, that the relationship is expanding. The same is true with Pakistan, and both at the detriment of the Emirates. Of course, Dr. Ghalibaf's trip to Qatar is both to negotiate and to make sure that the money is, if there's an agreement, is swiftly transferred to Iran, but also he's there to improve relations with countries in the Persian Gulf, because they made, except for Oman and Iraq, of course, they made a bad choice in supporting the United States and helping them kill all these Iranians and destroying so much of our infrastructure. But the Iranian Ayatollah Khamenei, he has stressed on more than one occasion that we have to have good relations with our neighbors. And so Dr. Ghalibaf, I'm sure, he is there also to see if there are ways to improve the relationship with the countries in the Persian Gulf, to push them or draw them away from the United States, at least to a degree.
Actually, moments ago, before coming to this live, we had the account of Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, publishing that he says, I invite all Islamic countries and governments to friendship and cooperation in goodness, so that by working together, we may take steps towards the advancement of the Islamic Ummah and the resolution of the Islamic world problems. Here is a new concept, in my opinion, what's going on out of this war, this conflict, which is the solution that the Iranian supreme leader is talking about: a new security architecture, a new cooperation, something that would bring peace and prosperity to the region. What is the Iranian concept on that, and how far they would go, Iranians would go to achieve that?
Well, this is something that actually the martyr Ayatollah Khamenei was also pursuing. But I think what the Iranians are now thinking, and what Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei is now thinking, and this is the third time within this short period of time that he's spoken about neighbors and the need to have improved relations. The thinking is now that since this war, these countries have recognized that the United States is not doing them any good, that following the United States has done enormous damage to their image and to their infrastructure and to their economies. And so now perhaps is an opportunity to convince them to not to change completely, because these are countries that are, their leaders are proxies, and their families, they go to the West, they study in the West, they spend their vacation in the West. I'm sure there's a lot of videos of their family members doing things that they shouldn't be doing in the West. So, up to a point, though, Iran thinks that now is a good opportunity to draw them away from the United States, at least so that there will be more safety and security in the region. And what Iran has been proposing is that the countries in the Persian Gulf region together they establish their own security, a collective security. But again, this is it's still very early, and we're still potentially on the verge of war again. Uh, but still, this is something that they are pursuing. But again, it could be hypothetically. I doubt it tonight or tomorrow night. But hypothetically speaking, we could be at war the next time you and I have this conversation. So nothing is clear. We could have an agreement. We could have stalemate for the days to come. We could have war. It's completely unclear where things are going. But in any case, the leader's message, the Hajj message that I think is a very interesting message that just came out on his Twitter account and other accounts, and his Telegram account. That alongside Dr. Ghalibaf's trip to Qatar, and as far as I know, he's still there. At least he was this morning. I think that is a new effort by Iran to see if things can change, and there does seem to be some movement. I don't know the details, but apparently there are some bilateral discussions going on between Iran and the other countries in the Persian Gulf region, and there has been some progress.
Yeah, as you've mentioned, it seems that the signs of these, because it wasn't just the head of the parliament together with foreign minister and the head of the central bank of Iran, Hemmati, he was there in because they want to know how they transfer the money, the frozen Iranian assets, which is something like $24 billion. And it seems that the United States has agreed to release at least half of that before before 60 days of ceasefire, and during the 60 days of ceasefire they're gonna release
At the
the
very
rest,
beginning,
the second
at the
half.
begin, at the big, yeah, at the beginning, I think about half of it is supposed to be released, and then the rest comes gradually,
So
if we have an agreement, and if the agreement is in place.
who's gonna guarantee that? It's gonna be the Qatari government or the United States?
Well, at the end of the day, uh, Iran is going to. Iran has learned a lot from the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. In the JCPOA, which I was involved with the JCPOA negotiations. I was in Vienna when it was signed. I was like the media advisor to the foreign minister, Dr. Zarif, back then. And the mistake that we made, the Iranians, meaning I wasn't a negotiator, but was that we in the agreement we had certain commitments, and the Americans had some commitments, and the Iranians carried out their commitments, and then the Americans wouldn't carry out theirs, and the Iranians were chasing after the Americans until the end of Obama's term in office, and the Americans just wouldn't implement the deal. So it turned out not to be a good deal for those reasons. If the Americans had actually been faithful and honest to the agreement, it would have been a decent deal. But we made the mistake of allowing them to have these loopholes and to take advantage of us. So this time around, the Iranians are not willing to do that. So at the very start, they have to receive that money, and that's why they're in Qatar, to make sure that this goes through immediately. There are no hiccups. But at the end of the day, the Iranians have the most important piece of leverage, and that is the Strait of Hormuz. And if the American side does not abide by its commitments, then the strait is closed. That's why Iran got such a good deal. In the war, they had the upper hand, and as a result, they were also able to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz. And the U.S. siege is a double-edged sword. It's hurting the Iranian economy, but it's devastating the global economy and, of course, the economies of these five Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf too. So the Iranians have this time around, they're not going to carry out their side of the bargain and then wait for this other side to do so. Because Obama didn't, and Trump is definitely worse than Obama. He's worse in the sense that he's untrustworthy, dishonest, and which actually, some Americans may think that this is a good thing. It's actually a bad thing for the United States because it makes it makes it impossible to come to any agreement with the United States almost. It makes it much more difficult because no one trusts the United States.
Yeah, I think many people know that because if Donald Trump feels just in the next 2 hours, he feels that he can defeat Iran by attacking him, he's going to do that. He
Oh,
doesn't care about negotiation, what's going on, and what has happened so
absolutely.
far.
And the Iranians are far more prepared for war today than they were 3 months ago. Economically speaking, as we discussed last time, yes, things are more difficult, obviously. But militarily speaking, Iran is much stronger than it was 3 months ago, significantly stronger. And Iran's allies across the region are more prepared, especially Yemen. So if war starts, it will be catastrophic for the global economy because immediately the Red Sea will be shut down. Immediately, the Iranians will, as soon as the Americans strike, they're going to strike back. And these countries in the Persian Gulf, they don't stand a chance. And of course, the Israelis will be hammered day and night. So uh, I think Trump doesn't want war. I think he's afraid of war. And the fact that he gave significant concessions in this agreement is an indication of that. But also the fact that the Americans were in such a rush to get this deal. The Iranians were slow. The Iranians, because of the JCPOA, the Iranians wanted to make sure there are no loopholes, nothing that the Americans could, take advantage of. The Iranians have gone to Qatar. They want to make sure everything will work correctly. But the Americans are in a rush. They have been, and then suddenly, as I said, we almost reached the finish line, and then you had the Zionists start screaming and yelling and expressing outrage and turning against Trump, and Trump seemed to get cold feet. And then we saw Netanyahu say he's going to destroy the cities, and it's like a monster. And again, the West completely ignores it. All this. One of the things that and then of course, I mean, well, I don't want to digress again, but it's just so upsetting. Um, so Netanyahu, and then the killing of the 4 sailors. But then you have, on the other hand, Trump saying something different about nuclear enrichment. So, it's unclear where things are going to go. We could have an agreement by this time tomorrow, perhaps, and we could have stalemate and then ultimately war. I mean, if anyone thinks it's one, there's a more chance of one or the other, I can't see the logic. It's just everything is too unclear. But in any case, just what I wanted to say is that it's really, Western journalists should really be ashamed of themselves. I mean, they have no credibility, they have no humanity, they have they have nothing. They're empty shells. In Gaza, they all pretended that we have no presence. We have no presence in Gaza. We cannot report and confirm the genocide, even though we were seeing it day and night for 2.5 years. And it is ongoing as we speak, and they're not talking about it anymore because they don't want people to focus on the genocide. But they have a presence in Lebanon. They have a very strong presence in Lebanon. Yet we see it doesn't make a difference at all. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever. The Israelis are carrying out slaughter day and night in Lebanon, slaughtering families, slaughtering children, exterminating families. And the journalists in Lebanon, no, they're useless. The Western journalists, they're useless. The mainstream Western media journalists, they're useless, and it doesn't matter if they're present or absent. Policy is always the same.
What would happen to American blockade if the Iran decides to gradually open up the Strait of Hormuz? What would be the future of the blockade, of American blockade and their forces in the region?
Well, they'd have to lift the blockade, and the Iranians won't gradually open it. The Iranians will open up, but it will take time, of course, for things to normalize. But the number of ships that are to pass through the strait within a month should be the normal number, and the Americans will waive sanctions on the Iranian energy sector. Those assets will be released, as we discussed. There will be a regional ceasefire, and the Americans are responsible for the Israeli regime because in the text it's Iran and its allies and the U.S. and its allies, which makes the Israeli regime equivalent to Hezbollah. Iran equivalent to the United States, the Israeli regime equivalent to Hezbollah. But then the Iranians will state that they will not have a nuclear weapon, which is fine because the Iranians have been saying that for decades. It's nothing new. Then, if all this goes well, after 2 months, then they begin a negotiating process about sanctions and about the nuclear program. And then we have to see if we have stalemate then, or if we go back to sanctions or